All right. Hello, 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 and welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm so glad that you could be joining us. My name is Stephanie, and I'll be your co-host for today. Today's webinar is a part of our larger BrainHQ Academy series, where we talk about the neuroscience behind different topics. Today's topic, as you all can see here, is the neuroscience of sleep. So let's get into the agenda for today. So once we're done with the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and kick off the webinar with a poll. The poll is going to have two questions for you. One is going to be single choice, and the other one is going to be multiple choice. And I'm also going to open up the chat for you all at that point. So if you would like to chat with me or Tom or Eric, you are able to do so using that chat box. Speaking of which, let me introduce Dr. Tom Van Vleet, who is going to be our main presenter for today. Tom, if you want to pop on, how you doing?
Hello, good. Good morning.
Good morning. So for those of you who have not seen Tom present before, Dr. Tom Van Vleet earned a dual doctorate in neuroscience and clinical psychology at Northern Illinois University and had additional training in neuropsychology at the University of Chicago. He's been with Posit Science as a senior scientist and our director of sponsored programs since 2014. So very glad to have you presenting today, Tom.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Stephanie.
Uh, After Tom's presentation, we are going to be joined by another returning guest, Dr. Aric Prather. So Dr. Prather is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of California, San Francisco, and a licensed clinical psychologist who helps lead the UCSF Insomnia Clinic. Aric, how are you doing today?
Great. Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. After their discussion, we will move on to a live Q&A. So if at any point during the presentation today you have a question, go ahead and click on the Q&A button on the Zoom control panel, and a window will pop up where you can type in your questions. We aren't going to be able to get to every question today, but we are going to do our best to combine questions and moderate questions so that way we can get as many of them as answered as possible. The other thing that I wanted to note is that today's webinar is being recorded and it will get posted to our YouTube channel sometime next week. If you want a notification for when this recording goes live, you can head on over to youtube.com/brainhq to subscribe to our channel, and you'll get that notification when the video is up. I'll also be sending everybody who is registered for the webinar a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our poll section here. Let me go ahead and launch that. And there we go. So we have two questions here, like I had mentioned. The first question is, how much, on average, how much sleep do you get per night? Are you looking at less than 3 hours, 3 to 5 hours, 5 to 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours, or more than 9 hours, which if you are, I'm a little jealous. And then the other question we have there are, what sort of habits do you do to get ready for bed? Talking about sleep hygiene a little bit. Are you into having a warm drink before bed? Maybe like reading. Maybe you have a wind down routine that includes showering and brushing teeth. Maybe you meditate. Maybe you stretch a little bit. Maybe you watch TV or listen to music. We want to know. And I'll also go ahead and, like I said, I'll open up the chat so that way you all can write in more to us if there are other sleep hygiene bits that aren't listed here that you want to share with us. All right. So, Tom, how much sleep do you think you get on average?
Lately, not enough. Probably 6 to 7.
6 to 7. Not bad, not bad. Could be worse, could be better. Eric, how about you?
I'm in the 7 to 9 category.
Nice.
That probably seems like the sweet spot to be. I think I'm also in the 7 to 9 category most nights.
Yeah.
And Eric, how about habits that you do to wind down at the end of the day? What do you do to get ready for sleep?
You know, I have two kids, and so my older son, who's 13, our routine now is to watch the show Lost. I don't know if you guys remember it
Oh
from
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What a
2000.
throwback.
But I haven't seen it in so long, and it's like brand new to him, and so it's basically brand new to me too. So it's been a great way. So watching TV is a good way to wind down. Sometimes a little suspenseful, but we get through it. Yeah.
All right, awesome. And Tom, how about you? Do you have any routines at night?
Yeah, actually, by virtue of our last sleep webinar, I guess probably 5 years ago or so, I learned that you really shouldn't engage with evocative content before bed. So I try to avoid the news or my phone or things that will spark some sort of, cascade of unresolved issues before bedtime, and often try to orient my wife accordingly. My kids are a little bit older now, so I don't have to do the bedtime rituals as I used to. And so my ritual is sort of to decompress and to, let go of any loose ends that I may be hanging on to before bedtime.
Yeah, absolutely. I am sort of the odd one out here. I don't have kids that I have to worry about. It's just little old me that I have to worry about at night. So I actually have kind of a long series of tasks that I do to get ready for bed. So I'll take a shower, I'll brush my teeth while I'm in the shower, I'll do skincare afterwards, and then I'll read for about an hour while I'm in bed and like no phone time. If I'm on my phone, it's over. I'll be up until 2 in the morning. So got to be really, really diligent about that.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, thank you. It's taken a while to get here. Um, all right. So we have quite a few people have gone ahead and submitted their answers to the poll. So I'm going to go ahead and end that there. So you should be seeing poll results on the screen. Thankfully, it looks like nobody is getting less than 3 hours of sleep per night on average. We have some folks that are saying 3 to 5. Most folks are saying 5 to 7 or 7 to 9. And then a couple of people are saying they, on average, get more than 9 hours. So Aric, do you have any comments on that? Do you have any sort of recommendations, or is, between 7 to 9 or 5 to 7 kind of the sweet spot?
Well, I mean, it's certainly the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the Sleep Research Society, recommend at least 7 hours to maintain optimal adult health. However, I will say that there does just seem to be some age relevance to this, and so when those recommendations came out, it was very strong up until the age of 65. And then beyond that, we're kind of less certain because there's this kind of tendency for a little bit of shorter sleep as we get older past the age of 65. And it's not clear if that is potentially harmful or part of the natural aging process. And so, I think when I think about this, like probably the, 7 to 9 is ideal, but it's not a one size fits all. It really has to do with how you feel during the day, whether you're functioning, are you napping during the day, all these other factors that we need to consider when we're thinking about how much sleep we need.
Hmm. Interesting. Aric, I have one short question. I won't forestall your agenda here, Stephanie. Sorry. I was curious. I was doing some literature review of in this area, and you as the expert, I'm curious. It seems as though that various aspects of sleep are, highly variable dependent upon the needs of the brain. So if you have an intense period of learning, you may have more REM sleep, for example, or things that are associated with memory consolidation. Is it possibly true that as you get older and your engagements are less sort of pressing, or you don't have a sense of urgency to meet a deadline or what have you, that your brain is taxed a little bit less than it would probably during your younger years when you're actively engaged in life? Would it be possible that can contribute to a lesser need for sleep or certain aspects of sleep?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think it's certainly possible. I think when we're talking about sleep duration, we're talking about kind of the amount of sleep and not necessarily the architecture that
Yeah.
underlies sleep. And so it's certainly less known about that, though, epidemiologic data, so kind of like large longitudinal samples that they followed over time, with where we've looked at in lab studies of kind of the sleeping brain, there is a decrease in deep sleep that is pretty common as we get older. And
Mhm.
maybe that is related to this in some way. I don't think it has been investigated kind of as rigorously as we'd like, but it's certainly kind of an open area to think about how sleep changes and what that means and why that might happen.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think with that makes for a good segue into Tom going ahead and taking over and starting his presentation.
Great. I'll just take 20 minutes here to give a brief overview of sleep, and then I'll lean heavily on Aric, Dr. Prather, as a sleep expert here. Really pleased to have him here today. We're very grateful to learn and correct me for all the misstatements I may make in this presentation. But it's important to recognize that sleep is not some passive, dormant activity. Your brain is very, very active. As shown here on the panel on the left, you can see all the different aspects of brain activation. These are brain waves, so to speak, being picked up by an external monitor. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot of shifts from different stages of sleep, which I'll talk a bit about. But it's very far from a passive process, and it's very active. And a lot of things during your waking life are dependent upon the integrity of this active process at night. So much so that sleep is thought to play a critical life-supporting role in restoring the body and the brain after your 16 hours of waking engagement. And it's even been called a superpower by another sleep expert, Matt Walker. There's a really good TED Talk around this, if you want to look that up. And then what I find comforting is a quote I took from Aric's book here, Dr. Prather's book, The Sleep Prescription, which is great, by the way, check that out. Sleep isn't something that you have to do, that you do per se. It's something that happens to you. So really, the upshot of what we're discussing today is let's set up the parameters of your life, the lifestyle, and habits and routines to set up the best environment possible for your brain to do what it's going to do. It knows how to sleep. It's the one that does all the sleeping and work for you. You don't have to make anything happen. It's just working in collaboration with your brain and what we know about sleep promotion. Nearly all animals sleep. I thought this was really fascinating. This is a video of an octopus that also experiences REM sleep. They have rapid eye movements. They have dramatic color changes. They have compressions of their suckers as if they're awake. Many of the same brain-based behaviors, presumably, that humans do during REM sleep. But I thought this was quite fascinating. There's several other species that exhibit REM sleep as well. So this is very much an active process for many other species and well conserved across the animal kingdom. So sleep occurs in stages and cycles. And what I mean by that is that, when you are awake and resting, your brain exhibits a particular pattern of activity. In this particular panel here, I'm showing what's known as alpha waves, or a characteristic waveform associated with relaxed wakefulness as you slip into sleep. Again, your job is not to make sleep happen, but to set up the parameters: relaxed, mind carefree, well, carefree to the extent to which you can be carefree, and then let the brain take over and slip into these other stages of sleep, which are characterized by 3 indicators: N1, N2, and N3. These are non-REM sleep. There's no dreaming or rapid eye movement going on. And then the 4th stage is often thought of as your dreaming sleep, or REM sleep. And you can see that as the brain transitions from stage to stage, as you go deeper and deeper into sleep, a lot of changes happen characteristically in terms of brain activation, which is measured here by virtue of an EEG, or electrodes on the scalp. And one thing I want to point out, and I'll refer to quite a bit today, is this deepest stage known as slow wave sleep. And I'll be using the acronym SWS, or the shortcut SWS here throughout the presentation. But that's what I'm referring to. This is an interesting stage of sleep. It's very different. You can see very slow, big arcing waves relative to wakefulness and even the lesser stages of sleep, and characteristically different from REM sleep as well. This is an important aspect of sleep that we'll talk about. And as Aric mentioned just a few minutes ago, this seems to diminish with age, or is reduced. And that may have implications for other things regarding memory. Sleep also occurs in stages. And what I mean by stage is that this characteristic decline into the deeper depth of sleep is followed by an ascension that happens in cycles. And this entire cycle is encapsulated here. The amount of time you typically spend does change over the night, and I'll talk about that next, but generally speaking, this is how much time you spend in each stage, stage called out here. And you repeat this about 4, 5, or 6 times per night to get a total 8 hours of sleep as the ideal shown here. And this is kind of what your brain does. So it's plumbing the depth of deep sleep, but it's also coming back up towards the surface. And this is where dreaming occurs, interestingly. And it's the most likely time within which you're going to awaken is after a state of dreaming. This may be a gross mischaracterization, but I think sleep can occur in halves. There's a first half of the night, second half of the night. And this may have implications for where perhaps you struggle with sleep, either getting to sleep or staying asleep. May have different ramifications. We can certainly discuss that with Dr. Prather. But generally speaking, and I could be corrected afterwards if these are misstatements, but generally speaking, there's a lot going on activity-wise, but now we're learning what actually that activity means. And what we appreciate most importantly is that memory consolidation, what you learn during the day is consolidated, processed during sleep, and particularly aspects of sleep that involve this slow wave characteristic, as I showed you before. And even preceding that in the stage above it, before you get to slow wave sleep, you have interesting waveforms that are associated with memory formation, K complexes, and sleep spindles. And the more of these you have, apparently correlates with how well your memory processing works and how capable you are of calling back memories the next day or in the future. And then it seems to be important that different types of memories, like declarative memories, facts, figures, names, etc., occur in the first half of sleep in terms of processing, as well as associative memories, things that are learned throughout the day that you can have associations with them or prior associations with learned knowledge. This seems to happen during the first half of the night, and this may happen throughout the night, and Dr. Prather can correct us in that, but it's an important knowledge to know that slow wave sleep is important for this process. And also one other very important process, which I'll get into a bit more later, is brain waste removal. So the brain does have an accumulation of metabolic waste and proteins and other aspects that are flushed out, so to speak, at night, and this happens during the slow wave sleep. The second half of sleep is characterized by more REM sleep or more dreaming. And interesting things happen, such as sleep paralysis during REM. So when you're dreaming, and vivid dreaming particularly, I guess dreaming can occur at other stages of sleep, but the most vivid dreams, the ones in which you feel embodied or acting out a particular storyline, are also coincide with sleep paralysis. The brainstem, at the level of the brainstem, shuts off the motor system, so you can't act out these dreams. It's quite interesting. And coming out of REM sleep is usually the time of the evening where you'll turn over or shift position because you've been paralyzed essentially for a period of time, and the body wants to readjust itself. Also, a lot of things get kicked up physiologically. In addition to your rapid eye movements, you have irregularities in breathing, you have an elevated heart rate and increased brain activity. The amygdala, which is thought to process fear and other aspects of emotion, is kicked on during REM sleep as well. And this may be involved with the processing of emotional events that happen during the day, which I'll get into a bit more later. Memory consolidation also occurs during the second half of sleep and during REM, processing new learning and particularly motor skills that are learned from the day. And interestingly, as I mentioned before, there's different changes in sleep architecture coincide with what the events of the day preceding it or the recent past entail. There's a lot of learning going on or intensive learning. It seems as though you have more REM sleep to consolidate the new learning. As I mentioned before, vivid dreaming does occur during REM sleep, and this is thought to be the domain within which emotions get processed, and emotionally charged events that happen during the day are processed during this period of time, during REM or dreaming sleep, and engaging, as I mentioned before, these important brain areas such as the amygdala, hippocampus, And what's thought to be the outcome of this, based upon some controlled studies, is that when people are woken up prior to going into REM sleep, or as they're going into REM sleep and disrupted REM sleep in a controlled fashion, they're just more emotionally reactive in the day following, in that they haven't had this benefit of REM activation and consolidation of emotional events that would otherwise allow them to emotionally offload the events of the day that may be distressing or concerning in some way. So this REM sleep certainly seems to have the benefit of reducing the intensity of emotional events that happen during the day, allowing more bandwidth, more tolerance in the subsequent day, given the benefit of this REM processing. So quite an interesting finding there. So going to back to some mechanics of sleep, how do we sleep? As I mentioned before, Dr. Prather made it clear to us that it's not our job to make sleep happen, but just to set up the parameters and such that provide the environment in which your brain can more readily fall asleep. Well, how does that happen? There are two what's known as sleep pressures. There's the homeostatic sleep drive and the circadian rhythm. We've probably all heard of the circadian rhythm. Fluctuates with the day and night cycle. And this triggers, the production of melatonin, a hormone produced in response to presence of darkness or absence of sunlight. As melatonin builds up, it drives more pressure for the brain to switch or transition into sleep. In addition to that, the homeostatic sleep drive is basically looking at the buildup of a chemical called adenosine, which is a metabolic byproduct of energy production. And this builds up throughout the day. And as this reaches its apex, it drives a lot of sleep pressure in accordance with the circadian rhythm. And these two collaboratively push you over the edge into the sleep state. And over time, as you're sleeping, this adenosine is exiting the body or processed, decreasing the sleep pressure, allowing you to wake up. In addition to that, the sunlight comes out, increasing your circadian rhythms. This also allows you to wake up too. So this dynamic balance between these two pressures are the only things that make you sleep. So it's important to honor some of the sleep hygiene rituals that we'll make mention of later on around consistent bedtime and exposure to light during the day and emphasizing these transitions. Notably, we know one thing affects, or two things affect, I'll make mention of here, that are behaviors, they're lifestyle issues that we can modify or change or plan around. And one is caffeine. As we know, caffeine stimulates the brain, and how it does that, it fits very nicely into the adenosine receptor and blocks that felt sense of sleep pressure. So as I mentioned, as adenosine builds up throughout the day, this metabolic byproduct of energy production, it can be blocked by caffeine. That is why caffeine provides that sense of wakefulness in some respects, particularly if you're drinking it in the afternoon when you have that natural dip in sleepiness. This is essentially what's going on. You're blocking that signal to the brain that would otherwise tell you, hey, you're actually building up some sleep pressure. That's why folks get sometimes rebound sleepiness with caffeine once the caffeine wears off. It has this long half-life, 4 to 5 hours or longer in some folks. It's highly variable. That adenosine is still in the system, still circulating. People feel flooded by an overwhelming sleep pressure. Similarly, alcohol is also known to disrupt sleep, although it does produce sort of a sense of sleepiness. It's a false sense of sleepiness. It's not a true sleep pressure. And it does, as you can see here, characteristically wreck your beautiful sleep architecture by pushing you through these stages in a way that's a bit wonky. Perhaps Dr. Prather can tell us a bit more about what we know about alcohol, but essentially it's not good in that you sort of miss these nuanced transitions that would otherwise allow you to better consolidate memory and restore the body. So what happens if we're having trouble sleeping, and what happens to our memory? As I mentioned, the importance of sleep and memory consolidation and processing is really, really important and paramount in terms of cognitive abilities the next day. If we have a poor night's sleep, we can all relate to the experience of not feeling as sharp, feeling dull, having a loss of word finding, difficulty with memory retrieval, very, very well relatable phenomena. This may be due to the fact that insufficient sleep or disrupted sleep, or what's called fragmented sleep, characterized by frequent waking or other variations in your otherwise elegant sleep staging, can contribute to a cognitive decline. Not only the next day, but if this is a routine event for you to have fragmented sleep, it could contribute to memory problems. And this is an emerging area of science, and maybe Dr. Prather can tell us a bit more about what we know. I think it's clear that, the brain is active at sleep. It's involved in memory processing and consolidation. In the absence of that good continuity of sleep, cognition suffers. And there's some thought that this may be sort of a contributor to disease states such as Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. It's important to also appreciate that some of the theoretical notions around this involve the removal of brain waste. As I mentioned, this system kicks on during slow wave sleep. It's run by a system called the lymphatic system. And in the absence of good slow wave sleep, perhaps you're clearing less brain waste, including amyloid, which is what's built up in disease states such as Alzheimer's. And this is a theoretical perspective on how perhaps Alzheimer's may be amplified or generated by virtue of poor sleep or habitual poor sleep. So it's definitely a concern we want to talk about today. And I'll just do a rapid segue into what we can do to improve our sleep. We know that from very preliminary studies to date that being more engaged during the day, being more active, having more sunlight can benefit the transition to sleep, can just draw a clear distinction between waking states and sleep states that allow your brain to do what it does. One thing we know from BrainHQ, the cognitive training platform, is that studies we've run to date, and we're doing a large definitive trial now, to look at the efficacy of this. But we know from preliminary data that it seems to be that BrainHQ training, as we know, if you've done the training to date, or if you're thinking about it, it definitely is an engaging set of activities, cognitive exercises, challenges, pushes you to your limit, definitely requires your brain to be fully engaged, attentive, enlivened, but if you will, by this activity. And that seems to, from preliminary data, allow folks to spend more time asleep while they're in bed. So their sleep efficiency, the amount of time spent in bed awake versus asleep, benefits. They're faster to fall asleep, and they have what's called improved sleep maintenance, and that they are able to maintain sleep with less awakenings following 3 or 4 months of engagement, routine engagement with BrainHQ. So this is an interesting finding. We're following up on this now to learn more. But other activities, engagement during the day, may also help in terms of your overall wake to sleep transition. And we could talk a bit more about this with Dr. Prather. One thing that's a really clear way to appreciate your dynamics of sleep, which is a variable, is to keep a sleep diary for about 7 days. And this is very simple, just a log next to your bed, noting what time you got in bed and intended to fall asleep, what time you actually fell asleep, roughly. If you experienced any wakings during the night, how long were you awake during those periods of time? And then what time did you wake up? And was that the ideal time, or is that waking up early and not being able to get back to sleep? And then overall, what was the quality of your sleep? Do you feel well rested? Do you have any daytime dysfunction due to poor sleep? Do you rely on sleep medications or other things to get you through the day, caffeine, extra coffee, etc.? I would just recommend that you try this for a week and then take an average of all these values that you generate, and you can get a good sense of where your sleep deficits may be, and perhaps you can better align yourself with some of the recommendations we'll provide in this webinar today. Speaking of, here's just a few simple ones. You're probably all very familiar with these things, and we'll learn more from Dr. Prather, certainly what's new or what's most relevant. in accordance with your questions. But keeping as Stephanie mentioned, a really clear bedtime routine sets up the brain to appreciate that this is a transitionary period behaviorally. All the cues, signals, behaviors are consistent from night to night, allowing the brain to better entrain or align itself with the transition between waking and sleeping. And so I think one way to do this is to keep a consistent bed and wake time. And apparently the research indicates now that you should try to keep the same wake time regardless of what time you do go to bed. So if you have a late night or you're out on a weekend, it's still good to wake up at the same time you do normally. And we can talk to Dr. Prather a bit more why this is important. Again, reducing the stimulation that you may engage. Don't watch the news. Don't have an argument. These things are, to the extent to which they're in your control, try to sort of allow the events of the day to fade and to feed yourself with things that feel restful and allow your brain to transition more easily. Reducing light exposure is thought to be sort of a contributor to poor sleep. I think this data is a little open to reinterpretation. I think it's more, and Dr. Prather can tell us otherwise, more the amount of stimulation that you take in. And I think, doing things like watching TV may not be bad as long as it's not stimulating TV or evocative or sounds like CSI or something like that. So I think there is some open questions around the exposure to so-called blue light in screens and whatnot. But I think it's around the amount of activation that these activities produce in your brain that is the key driver of sleep disruption. Keeping the bedroom dark and cool is good. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol late in the day, as I mentioned previously, and also getting sufficient light exposure and exercise during the day, getting fully active, engaging in your life. And again, BrainHQ is a good option for this. And that's a structured challenge that can be presented to you in digestible forms throughout the day. So this is one mechanism by which you can get fully engaged such that your brain knows that the transition to sleep is upcoming. So I'll stop there. I'm really curious to talk to Dr. Prather a bit more about some of these issues and learn where I made some misstatements if I did, and to learn a bit more about what's going on in current sleep research.
That was an amazing presentation.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots to unpack. I'm curious if you had any initial impressions about or anything, or any inaccuracies that you think would bear consideration to clarify. Or...
No, I mean, I think just on the final slide around kind of a standardized wake up time, that I think the data really suggests that kind of the more stable your timing of sleep, which is not something that we often kind of really, we as sleep researchers, we've really focused on kind of the amount that people get. But it does seem that the timing seems to matter as much, and in some studies, more than the amount that people get when it comes to certain health outcomes. And, it really implicates kind of the circadian system, which again was not, for many, many years, there were people that studied kind of sleep, and there were people that studied kind of the circadian function, right? Like the people that studied sleep are kind of interested in health and the brain and the circadian function. People are like, my view is like they're really interested in math and like, like model systems and things like that. But, now that we have kind of a lot of kind of epidemiologic data and longstanding health outcomes, it does seem that the timing matters. And so, the standardized wake time is certainly the first thing that I tell people to do if they're having sleep problems, right? Like I'm not, we don't want to be kind of the fun police around like sleeping in on the weekend and those sorts of things. I mean, it does, there is some benefit to kind of catching up that sleep if for some reason during the week you can't get more sleep, right? There are like lots of people out in the world for structural reasons are shorted on sleep, whether it's kind of grants or family or their job or what have you, and so the trade-off to get some more of that sleep on the weekend is important. But all that being said, when people have sleep problems, it's really hard to prescribe a bedtime to someone. Like people that have insomnia, it can be very anxiety provoking to be told that, okay, well, you need to be in bed, you need to be asleep by 10, because guess what? Like 9:30, 9:45 rolls around and they're like, well, I'm not feeling sleepy. Oh my gosh. And then they start getting worried and so we can't control that, kind of related to the quote that you mentioned, that, you know, sleep happens to us. It kind of washes over us, right? It's the absence of doing. One thing we can control, though, is when we get up. And because we know enough about the circadian rhythm, we know enough about our homeostatic sleep drive. If we get up at the same time each day, and we don't use dramatically different amounts of energy from day to day, that you will end up getting sleepy around the same time each night, right? You have to trust in the idea that the like sleep and kind of the biology of sleep has been conserved across species, across millennia, that there is like this thing inside of us of being human that allows this to take place, if we just kind of stick to these basic kind of principles. And so, but again, it really is, if you're trying to work on your sleep, right? If that's where I don't want to be too like prescriptive on that, because it's hard, people don't love the idea of having to get up at the same time every day when they don't have to, right? And I get that. I don't like it, but it is a good principle to kind of stick with, to as an anchor point for all the other things that follow.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're making an important point about sort of catching up on sleep on the weekend. And I think that was that long held notion that, oh, yeah, you can just sleep in, as long as you can on the weekend, you'll catch up for all that sleep, insufficient sleep during the week. I was thinking, I was reading something recently around sort of that it's not a one-to-one makeup session, if you will. That 1 hour you're losing during the week, you're not going to gain a full 1 hour by sleeping an extra hour on the weekend. It's probably two-thirds of that, right? Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, it's, there's thought to be a cost overall, right? And I mean, we really see this in kind of acute settings. So if you deprive someone of a full night of sleep and then you let them sleep the next night, they're not going to sleep 2 nights worth of sleep, right? Like your brain can only do so much, you can only make so much sleep. And so in that kind of acute vacuum, there's likely some cost to that. Now, it's probably in the short term, important, because it certainly impacts our ability to kind of think clearly, to maintain attention, kind of motor skills and things of that sort. In the long term, I don't know. I mean, it's unlikely that kind of short acute bouts of sleep loss make a huge difference. But chronic short sleep, we know, is problematic. And even when people do try to make it up on the weekend, it's called social jet lag. There's this, those data still support kind of some risk in the long term if done kind of habitually. But I mean, look, like the best thing that we can do now is focus on how to support our sleep moving forward, right? And every little bit probably helps to make it more consistent and more robust.
Sure. Yeah. I like the way you said that your brain can only make so much sleep, which is really fascinating, because we think, oh, yeah, on the weekend I could just sleep all day, Saturday, but really your brain can only make so much.
I mean, it's a really great example when we think about when people nap during the day and then they are so shocked that their sleep is a little bit different than they thought it would be at night. And I mean, when people come to our clinic, it's obviously one of the first things we ask about. And I think about it in this, if you are say a 7 hour sleeper and you use one of those hours in the middle of the day, don't be surprised if at night it's not 7 hours or it is lighter. We find that when people may nap during the day, it can actually lead to more fragmented, kind of lighter feeling sleep at night. And so there are siesta cultures, right, where naps are part of the lived experience, but also their dinners are much later, their timing is off. Like the whole rest of the system is set up to account for these daytime naps. And so naps are always an interesting question in webinars like this, because are they good for you? Are they bad for you? I think naps are a tool, right? Like they can be really helpful in the short term, particularly if you're feeling asleep at the wheel, or you just can't keep your eyes open, it can be an opportunity for alertness, for re-energizing you. But it can also be a symptom of something going on, right? That your sleep at night needs to be addressed. Obstructive sleep apnea as we get older is like kind of the most common thing that we wonder about, because people think that they're sleeping normally. They're actually kind of waking up throughout the night because they're having trouble breathing. And then that leads to daytime sleepiness and napping. And so then, we need to think about, okay, like, is this becoming a habitual that you need this? And is it a sign of something else that should be addressed so that you don't feel so tired during the day? But in general, that they can certainly have a place in kind of our experience. They can be nourishing. People can like really enjoy a good quick nap.
Yeah, I guess, one question on that, the quick naps, like, 15, 20 minutes, is that
Yeah.
more of an arousal booster and doesn't really have any implications for what the brain does at sleep, like memory or processing of emotions? Is it mostly just sort of an attention saver for that?
Well, right. So that's a great question. So in general, we recommend short naps, and the reason for that is because particularly in the afternoon, if people go to take a longer nap in the afternoon, it increases the chance that you'll fall into deep sleep, into that slow wave sleep.
Mm.
And that can feel good in the moment, but really hard to get out of, right? Like we've all probably had this experience where you wake up from a nap and you just feel like garbage. Like you're like, I feel way worse than I did before I took.
Right.
And that's sleep inertia. Now, with respect to your question about alertness, I mean, there are research groups that just do nap studies, right? And they just have people nap, and often the outcomes are cognitive outcomes like learning and memory. And so, we think that even those nap studies, little naps can really help with consolidation and learning. And so, because it's thought to be, the secret sauce in the sleep is contributing to that, right? And you can, because as you mentioned, in the kind of the first half of the nighttime, it's slow wave sleep. In the second half, it's more REM sleep. That actually has a circadian rhythm to it. And so if you take naps in the morning, like say, soon after you wake up, or 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever, you're more likely to get some of that REM sleep. But then as you go later on into the day, you're more at risk of this slow wave sleep. We only look at it in the context of the nighttime, but there's actually a circadian rhythmicity for the preference of that aspect of sleep, which I think is pretty interesting.
That's very interesting, huh? So you're more likely to have that groggy experience and come out of a nap if you're later in the afternoon than you are.
Right. I mean, yeah, if you get into that slow, I mean, it's
Oh.
just greater probability, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you're more likely to have some dreams in the morning if you get back to sleep.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really fascinating. Um, yeah, one thing you had mentioned just in passing, I think it's important to note, and we don't have to take a big segue here, but it's really important that the ramifications of sleep apnea. And I
Hmm.
want to understand it. If you're a snorer, if you've always been a snorer, it's still a warning sign that you should be checked out for sleep apnea. So much so that if it's untreated, your risk factor for dementia is like 38% higher or 40% higher than it would be if you weren't someone who snores or has sleep apnea. That seems like a really relevant concern for a lot of folks who, yes, I've been a lifelong snorer, it's not a big deal. Is that something you counsel folks on in terms of your practice or in the clinic?
Yeah, I mean, I have always thought that if we were to like the best way to kind of move the needle on sleep health at the population would to get everyone screened for obstructive sleep apnea.
Yeah.
And there is some kind of I wouldn't say controversy, but some ambiguity around the risk at very mild levels, right? Because it does seem to be something that moves along with aging as our kind of like our body is less kind of taut with respect to our airway and things like that. And so snoring becomes more common. But there are treatments that we have figured out how to address this problem. Not all of the treatments are as easily implemented, but there's innovations in this space. So I mean, continuous airway pressure kind of CPAP therapy has been the primary one, and some people will kind of have recollections of kind of early days of that were very unpleasant. but there's been innovations and made it less obtrusive and quieter and all these other things, and so it's absolutely something that people should get addressed. I mean, talk to your primary care physician about, if you're a snorer. Ask your bed partner if they notice any of those things. I mean, oftentimes it's the bed partner that like drags in the patient, and is like,
Yeah.
you need to do something.
You're driving me
It's
crazy.
ruining my life, and so it's kind of a welcomed intervention. There are obviously risk factors, kind of being overweight, high blood pressure, being over 50, being a man. All of those things are kind of like go into the calculation of risk.
Okay.
But I mean, women absolutely are probably very underdiagnosed with sleep apnea, just because it's like not, the way that we think about it is not, that's not the picture we get, but it's something worth investing in, just because of the kind of the downstream effects that it can have on your health, but also kind of your daytime functioning. I mean, I don't know how many of us feel like completely chipper all the time. I mean, there might be something going on in the night that you can address to try to improve on that.
Yeah. I have one sciencey question for you, and then Stephanie can let us know when we want to open to questions. So I look at some research around sort of associative learning, and this interesting emerging data around like, okay, if you have a learning event and you pair a tone or some frequency with aspects of the learning where you feel like I got the right answer, tone comes on. And then you play this tone or some frequency at a sub-perceptible level during various aspects of sleep, your recall is actually significantly better. And this is very, very preliminary stuff. So I was curious if it crossed your radar at all, if there's anything you've seen around this that's meaningful or.
I mean, that's amazing.
Right.
And I would love to see that to become, I mean, it's really interesting. All of the kind of cognitive neuroscience research that's going on in this area, particularly as they start to kind of roll out devices that people can take into their homes, right? To kind of begin to enhance their learning and just, there are these kind of really interesting devices that might enhance deep sleep and, to improve memory or reduce cognitive decline and those sorts of things. And I think we're still in the early days of that, but, if that's possible, I mean, sign me up, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, not that I need to be productive all hours of the night, but it would be a nice addition.
Yeah. It's an interesting topic you raised too around sleep devices and whatnot. And is there value in these sleep monitoring? Like everyone, people use an Apple Watch or they use a Fitbit or some other device that records your movements throughout the day. There's a correlation between that and quality of sleep staging. How do you counsel folks on the reliability of this data that they get from their devices around sleep staging? And
yeah, it's a great question, and I will say, like, I've been following the Q&A in the chat, and I want to say like a quarter of the questions are about this. So
that's like our number one question right now.
Okay, good segue.
So nailed it. It's like, it's been really impressive, the quality of the devices that have come out over the last several years, and the investment in the technology space around sleep from a consumer standpoint. I would say that all of the devices, I mean, kind of the main ones, Apple Watch, so Apple Watch, Oura Ring, whatever, are their accelerometry to assess kind of sleep onset and total amount of sleep and how fragmented someone's sleep is generally on par or outperforms kind of like research grade devices that are risk based, right? I mean, none of them are actually kind of touching the brain or the scalp or the EEG signal to actually know when we're truly asleep, but in general those are really good. Now I mean, what everybody wants, right, is around kind of sleep architecture, like how much deep sleep you get, how much REM sleep you get. And, I would say that devices like Apple or the Apple Watch or the Oura Ring, or, there are probably other ones that do this. They try to triangulate all of these signals and use kind of probability, kind of knowing that the first half of the night is mostly, deep sleep and they have respiration rate and pulse, oxygen saturation, all those sorts of things. And I think in general, at least the Oura Ring is the one I'm probably most familiar with. I think the correlation between kind of in lab polysomnography, which is the gold standard, and the ring is around like 70%. So, accuracy, which is much better than it used to be, right? And it's pretty good. And I expect that for all of these devices, it will get better and better and better. I think that the caveat is it's really for consumer use. I can't even tell you how many times people come into our clinic with their data and they say things like, look, it says I'm getting 3 minutes of deep sleep. What's happening? And we can take them into the sleep lab. I mean, we don't do this because it's not indicated, but if you did, and maybe it would say that, maybe it wouldn't. We don't really know. Like there's norms for the amount that people get in general, but we're individuals, and you know, unless there's kind of profound, uh, symptoms that are related to this that we would be concerned about, it's probably fine. And there are some maybe behaviors that we can improve upon to see what that does for this sleep metric. But we do worry about people kind of digging into their data and having anxiety about it. In fact, when these wearable devices came out, there was a term coined called orthosomnia, which is an insomnia that develops because of wearable data, and people like getting so focused on it that now they're just they're so wrapped up in their sleep. And honestly, sleep is something that the more you try to grab it, the more it kind of drifts away, right? And so it's really interesting. It's great for the data are great for like kind of N of one experiments. Like I started doing meditation at night, or I stopped drinking alcohol, or I start drinking alcohol. All these sorts of things, and seeing how it changes. And there are reliable changes. I mean, for me and for most people, like if I have like any alcohol at night, like it immediately shows up in the sleep metrics. Like I don't even, it's incredible. And so you can learn that way about what works for you and what doesn't. But I just worry that people can sometimes take it to the next level, that actually it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it reminds me of another tip you provided in our last webinar around if you wake up in the middle of the night, don't look at the clock. Just try to get back to sleep. And that's been a huge game changer for me, because I would wake up at whatever 3 or 4. I'm like, oh, it's only 4 o'clock, and then you have this anxiety attack, and it disrupts sleep even further.
Totally.
Yeah.
I,
So
last night I woke up. I was like, oh, it must be morning. I looked at the clock and it was 12:49, and I was like, oh my God. I'm like, this is not good.
that's an amazing first cycle, though. You had
Yeah,
depth in that one.
but we got through it. That's how it is.
Oh.
So actually, speaking of sleep cycles and waking up in the middle of the night, we had a couple people asking about sort of biphasic sleep patterns. Like, is that sustainable? Is that a healthy, okay thing to do? Biphasic sleep patterns meaning, sleeping 4 hours at one point during the day, being awake for a bit, and then going back to sleep for like another 4 hours or so. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? So the background and idea is that perhaps before indoor lighting, right, we were more kind of tied to the sundown and sun up, and so there was this biphasic sleep pattern where people would go to sleep when the sun went down. They would sleep for some period of night. They'd wake up. They'd kind of do chores. They'd like lots of things during that time. Then go back to sleep and then wake up, and so it is in theory sustainable if for some reason you don't use indoor lighting or have any other things that kind of affect your life in ways that make you stay awake. In general, there has been this consolidation. This isn't without controversy. There have been some like tribes in kind of unincorporated areas where they don't show this biphasic, and it's not clear, if have they been touched, and it's touched by kind of outside forces, and that's still why they sleep in a consolidated fashion. But in general, there's no reason that someone couldn't do it. It's very unlikely that someone could sustain it.
Interesting. Sorry, Stephanie, do you have more questions from the audience?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've got a ton more
So many
questions, but
questions,
none specifically about the biphasic sleep.
Okay. Yeah.
Another question that we get a lot, and this was sent in even by people before the webinar who wanted to make sure this question got answered. People are really curious about using melatonin pills, like over-the-counter melatonin.
Yeah.
Is it helpful in treating insomnia? How do you determine dosage and timing? Can you talk a little bit about figuring that out?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the most common questions. And so melatonin is commonly used. It has the clinical trial data does not suggest that it has a strong effect on insomnia, but people use it all the time. I mean, it probably does for some people make them feel sleepy. In general, we recommend that it's used for things where people have kind of circadian rhythm disorders. So if they're kind of night owls and they want to shift it, or if they are traveling through time zones, that it can help with jet lag. And in those cases, we recommend a dose of 0.5 milligrams, which is much lower than people typically take, and timing of around 5 hours prior to when they want to be asleep in that time zone, or if they want to shift their circadian rhythm where they are, doing it kind of several hours earlier, usually 4 to 5, because what it does is it kind of cues your body to start making your own endogenous melatonin. I think people will often use it as sleep aids, and I guess I would just suggest that probably starting with a lower dose is recommended if you're going to do it at all. 3 milligrams, something like that. But again, the clinical trial data don't necessarily support it, though I do appreciate that for some people, they definitely feel sleepy as a consequence.
And
Yeah,
is there... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I just want to clarify from the clinical trial data, the effect size is fairly small, right?
Very small.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah. Like it's not recommended. It's as an efficacious tool for sleep.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's what I understood.
And talking about other sleep medication, diphenhydramine, Benadryl, is there a reason why somebody would use that over melatonin?
The diphenhydramine or Benadryl, there has been some kind of like epidemiologic data for concerns that it may have long-term effects on cognition or early cognitive decline. And so, it's far from conclusive, and certainly not at the level of things like benzodiazepines and things of that sort. But we don't really know the long-term effects of most of the drugs that people take, and so this one might be concerning. And so, there are alternative therapies for this. I mean, as was mentioned in the beginning, we run an insomnia clinic at UCSF. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is definitely the first line treatment to help people sleep. And usually, 90% of the people that come to our clinic and to clinics around the country are on something or taking something habitually. And so there are standard ways to help people taper that off and find a solution that might make it easier for them to fall asleep with something a little less concerning, at least in the long run.
Fantastic. There is another repeat question, and I remember this question came up in the last webinar and we didn't have time to answer it. So I want to make sure that we get to it today for those people that have been waiting years for this answer. What do you recommend for people who have to get up in the middle of the night to use the facilities? If
Definitely
it is a big thing that is disruptive to sleep, how do you sort of work around that?
Yeah, I mean, right. And it happens more as we age, for sure. I mean, I think, most people have probably already tried like limiting liquids or all these other things. I mean, I think the standard plan is like, if you do have to get up and use the bathroom and you get back to bed and it's difficult for you to fall asleep, if it goes on for more than 20-30 minutes, you want to get out of bed to do something to wind down. I mean, the goal is to kind of condition yourself so that you are able to get to bed more rapidly over the long term. And maybe it doesn't even mean getting out of bed, doing things that are, quiet for you, like reading or kind of doing a meditation or a mantra, or just kind of mind games, right? Like, going through the alphabet and picking names of people, kind of things that can focus you, just so that you don't get into this state of kind of worrying or rumination, worrying about your sleep. I mean, this is so common. And so just trying some of those things but I mean, it is part of aging and part of life. And so, it's kind of just managing it, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like we need 2 hours for these sleep.
I mean, there
I
are
know,
like
there's never enough
100
time.
questions.
There's never enough time. Unfortunately, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to have to start winding down here. I do have a slide that I want to share with you folks with Aric's information. Aric, like we said, is a professor at the University of California, San Francisco. If you want more information about him, you can also go to aricprather.com. Aric, can you give us a little tidbit about your book, what people might want to read it for?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so, basically this book really tries to distill the principles of kind of our primary way to help people sleep, but it's kind of written for kind of like popular consumption. And so it's kind of takes you through the steps of how you might want to get your sleep back on track based on like behavioral principles. And so a lot of the stuff that we talked about will be in there, but also a lot more. Also I just want to note that, there are a lot of questions in this chat. And if people, are really compelled, you can certainly email me. I'm happy to do that if that's helpful for anyone. But yeah, I hope everyone kind of gets the sleep that they deserve.
Absolutely. Uh, Let me say a couple of final words here, just looking for webinars going in the future. So our next webinar next month is going to be all about the personal trainer, and that will be taking place on March 12th. Our next BrainHQ Academy webinar is going to be nutrition in the brain, and that's going to be taking place on April 16th. And invitations for those webinars will go out a week beforehand. Aric and Tom, do you have any final words that you want to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I just want to thank Dr. Prather for joining us today. It's really helpful to learn from an expert who works in this space and to appreciate all the nuances, because there's a lot happening in this area of science, particularly in the cognitive neuroscience that I'm familiar with. So it's a very exciting time to learn more, and I keep reverting my mind back to what you wrote in your book and had said to this audience before, is like, you just sleep is something that happens to you. You don't have to make it work. You don't have to sort of fret and be anxious and be fearful that you're not doing something to make something naturally that happens to you anyway work better. Just sort of follow some of these guiding principles. Read Aric's book. It's great. It's very simple, straightforward, has a lot of nice anecdotes in it. And just allow yourself to submit to the process and let your brain do what it does.
100%, all that.
Easy. All right. Well, thank you everybody. Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Again, sorry if we couldn't get to your question, but hopefully you can share this recording with friends and family who may have concerns about their sleep. And I hope that it also leads to you getting better sleep in the future. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you.